Welcome back to our series on Islamic Law on Succession. If you haven't watched our first video, Introduction to Islamic Law on Succession, I highly recommend you start there. It lays down the foundation, explaining what succession means, who the Muwarith and Warithun are, and why Islamic inheritance law is so mathematically precise. Today, we'll explore one of the most important topics in this field, the 12 Quranic Sharers. So, what exactly are Quranic Sharers? These are the heirs whose portions are explicitly mentioned in the Quran, specifically in Surah An-Nisa, verses 11, 12, and 176. They're called sharers because their shares are fixed, meaning they receive a definite portion of the estate before anything else is distributed. Now, just to give you an overview, the discussion on inheritance shares is also found under Title 3, Legal Succession, from Articles 110 to 122 of Presidential Decree 1083, also known as the Code of Muslim Personal Laws of the Philippines. This section explains who the heirs are, how their shares are determined, and the specific conditions that affect their entitlement. To make this easier to remember, let's start by grouping them. First, by gender. Male sharers. We have the husband, the father, grandfather, and the uterine brother. Female sharers. We have the wife, mother, daughter, son's daughter, germane sister, consanguine sister, grandmother, and uterine sister. That makes a total of 12 Quranic sharers. These sharers are identified based on their relationship to the decedent. For instance, the father is the direct father of the deceased, while if a wife survives, it means the deceased was her husband. Now, here's a tip, especially for those taking exams or studying Islamic succession. Try to pair them by relationship: husband and wife, father and mother, daughter and son's daughter, germane sister and consanguine sister, uterine brother and uterine sister, grandfather and grandmother. This pairing makes them much easier to memorize and understand because you see how each counterpart functions in relation to the other. Alright, now let's go through each of them: their shares, their conditions, and who can exclude or reduce them. 1. The husband. When the deceased leaves no descendants, no children or grandchildren, the husband receives one half of the estate. But if there are descendants, his share is reduced to one fourth. The husband is a permanent sharer. No one can exclude him completely from inheritance. 2. The wife. For the wife, her share is one fourth if her husband leaves no descendants. But if there are children or grandchildren, she gets one eighth. Like the husband, the wife can never be excluded, but her share can be reduced depending on the presence of descendants. 3. The father. The father's share depends on whether the deceased has children. If there are male descendants, the father receives one sixth. If female, he gets one sixth plus residue. But if there are no descendants, he becomes a residuary, meaning he inherits whatever is left after the other sharers receive their portions. The father also has the power to exclude all collateral relatives, such as uncles. 4. The mother. The mother receives one sixth if the deceased leaves descendants, or if there are two or more siblings. In the case of Umariyatan, she will receive one third. No worries, we will explain the Umariyatan case in a separate video. The mother cannot be excluded. She always inherits something. 5. The daughter. If there's only one daughter and no son, she receives one half of the estate. If there are two or more daughters, they share two-thirds equally. However, if a son is present, the daughter becomes a residuary, meaning she shares the remaining estate with him at a ratio of 2 shares for the male and 1 for the female. 6. The son's daughter. When we talk about the son's daughter, that's the granddaughter through a son, her share depends on who else survives. If she inherits alone and there's no son or daughter, she receives 1/2 of the estate. If there are 2 or more of them, they share 2/3 equally. But if there's one daughter, the son's daughter gets 1/6 to complete the total share for female descendants. Now, if she survives together with the son's son, she becomes a residuary heir, sharing the remainder of the estate with him at the ratio of 2 shares for the male and 1 for the female. However, if she survives with 2 daughters, her share drops to 0, because the Qur'an allocates only 2/3 in total for female descendants. In that case, she is defaulted or excluded. And finally, if a son of the deceased is still alive, she is completely excluded from inheritance. 7. The full sister, germane sister. The full sister or germane sister gets 1/2 if she is alone. If there are 2 or more, they share 2/3. She may also become a residuary when paired with a daughter or a son's daughter. However, she can be excluded by male descendants or by the father. 8. The consanguine sister, half-sister on the father's side, inherits 1/2 of the estate if she is alone. If she inherits together with a full sister, her share is reduced to 1/6 because 1/2 has already been allotted to the full sister. Remember, the combined share of all female heirs should not exceed 2/3 of the total estate. If there are 2 or more consanguine sisters, they collectively receive 2/3. When she survives along with a consanguine brother, they both become residuaries, sharing the remainder of the estate in the ratio of 2 shares for the male and 1 for the female. If she survives with a daughter or a son's daughter, she also becomes a residuary, under what we call residuary together with another's rights, or simply RTA. We'll discuss this category in a later video. Finally, the consanguine sister can be excluded by male descendants, by the father, by a full brother, and by default by 2 germane sisters. 9. The paternal grandfather. If the grandfather inherits with its male descendants, he gets 1/6 of the estate. If he inherits with any other sharer, he still gets 1/6 and may also receive the remainder as a residuary. If there's a female descendant, like a daughter or granddaughter, the grandfather takes 1/6 plus the residue, meaning he gets both a fixed share and what's left. If there are no descendants at all, then he simply inherits as a residuary. But if the father of the deceased is alive, the grandfather doesn't inherit. 10. The grandmother. Paternal, the grandmother receives 1/6, but she's excluded if the mother, father, or an intermediate grandfather of the deceased is alive. Lastly, we have the uterine brother and uterine sister, the siblings who share the same mother. Each receives 1/6 if they are alone, but if there are 2 or more, they share 1/3 equally. They are excluded by male descendants or the father. Later on, we'll talk about the residuaries, those who inherit what's left after the Qur'anic Sharers receive their portions. We'll also learn how to calculate actual shares using what we've just discussed. But for now, make sure you've mastered the 12 Qur'anic Sharers, because everything else in Islamic succession builds from here. If you found this video helpful, make sure to subscribe, like, and watch our next episodes. This is Legalese, where laws are made simple.